What if the gods of antiquity were real? Every myth, story, or seed of religion was based in events that happened long before human civilization. What if we know fragments about the society that existed before our own? Buried deep in the stories of Atlantis, Lemuria, and the fall of Eden. What if after the rise and fall of Atlantis, they took refuge among mortals? What if they never left? Lacuna is about the missing pages of our own history. The secrets that lay underneath our world from the very beginning. Gods are real. These are their stories.
We made it.
Yes.
Thank you for joining the Lacuna Writers Room. We are building an epic setting for use in fiction and media. You'll see it in games, stories, all kinds of things we're going to be building from this setting. I'm author and game designer Christopher Gray, and with me is author, actor, and game designer Dannie DeLisle. The music you just heard is actually original composition for Lacuna, composed by Ryan Franks, and the vocals by Nina Story. So here we are.
Pretty epic. That music is really good, actually. It's really awesome.
It's kind of an earworm. I've had it playing because we're preparing for the stream. I've had it playing a lot, and I just, going to the store with that in mind.
Yeah.
Slowly lifting up grape nuts. And that composer was great. I gave him pretty, I would say, abstract instructions. I told him what the project was. And I said, the music that I like is kind of like, I some stuff from Baldur's Gate, some stuff from some other video games I like Conan, kind of ethereal, moving. And then I saw a video of a kid in a Catholic church singing that holy key. There's a particular key that they sing that invokes a spiritual movement. And I was like, if you can figure that out, that's what I want. And that's what he did.
Nice.
So you're actually hearing that same key. It's supposed to invoke a sort of spiritual.
It feels epic, you know. It feels very, like I should be like on a plane somewhere on a horse with hair blowing by me and just watching the downfall of my kingdom.
It's just another Tuesday for you.
It's just another Tuesday, but got to be epic Tuesday.
Right. Well, so what is Lacuna? Yeah, we're here. What is this? I think that I've put very little about it out, except that it is a setting. You and I have been doing some deep brainstorming around it. In short, I think the purpose of this stream is for us to do our work, but publicly, and invite the larger community in to observe, to hang out, to think about it, to help. And maybe we all learn something more about world building and story building along the way. So we at this point don't have anything except an idea and kind of a path that we want to go, a vision, and want to use this platform to sort of build it in real time. Do you think that's fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a cool experiment. I don't really know how it's going to go. I have a feeling that it's going to be partially self-serving. I want to be conscious that I'd like to bring other people into the process for the benefit of understanding the process, and as creators, helping each other build and understand tools in order to be better creators. And I think in that way it can be more universal. But we're going to be self-serving in that we're going to do this by creating our setting, and and I'm okay with that. I mean, why not? I'm a Leo. I'm supposed to be very self-centered.
Right. I'm a Virgo. I'm the earth. I'm the grounded, You're
going to bring me back to center, probably.
That's right.
Nice.
Yeah, this is really fun. And I don't know if there's anyone that really does this, but how do you build a world and how does that happen? And what do you need to do and start your building blocks and everything. So yeah, here we are. If you're watching this, you are in on the ground floor. We have nothing but vibes, an epic song, a logo, and hope.
and we have punch and pie. The problem is, I don't think Nick is in anywhere near Phoenix or Los Angeles. So
he is in Phoenix.
You are in Phoenix. Oh,
yeah. Hi.
Okay, so Nick's gonna head over.
Yeah.
And get some punch and pie from you, Danny. I hope you're ready.
Oh, great.
I do have Topo Chico, which is not quite the same.
Oh, I have water.
They're not sponsors yet. Well, it's water. It's just Topo Chico water.
It's carbonated. Yeah, it's good though. I like it.
This flash of wine. So
what do we have so far? Yeah, what do we have so far?
So okay, I had a vision before we came together on this, that I wanted to tell the story of Atlantis as if it were real, like Atlantis, but Game of Thrones. Not that Game of Thrones is real, but I guess it's a more realistic take on the kinds of fantasy settings we're used to seeing.
Well, yeah, because he based it on the War of the Roses, I think,
right.
George R. R. Martin. So that's why it kind of has that.
It feels more authentic.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm not saying that I don't want magic and I don't want monsters or any of those things, but I would like it to feel real. And it's an aspiration that comes from the idea of, I'm sick of the painted Atlantis that we're all used to seeing. The idea that, it's this ethereal society, the Disney version, I guess, the Platonic version, I guess. And I would just like to see, well, we're talking about a pre-Bronze Age society. So this should be more swords and sandals and less, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, but I've lost my train of thought, but Elrond. What's his city? Oh man, I'm going to get crucified for this. That place where Elrond lives.
Rivendell. In Landris in Elven, actually.
So I don't want Rivendell. I know that was my vision coming into this. And I think that also, as a writer, I have had a world that I've been writing in for years that has continuity just because I've been writing it. And I wanted to apply that to this. So the idea that, okay, if Atlanteans were real, then maybe they were the gods of antiquity. And those gods have persisted throughout history. And not in that kind of we're seeding civilization kind of way that we've heard from Victorian fiction, not like that, but more like we're getting in the way of humanity more often than not, and we have our machinations against one another, and we use humanity often as a tool, or maybe sometimes we help, and so that living in society amongst the mortals ever since the fall. So my dream is that this is the setting. So that means we can be creating fiction that takes place in the modern day, in the 1940s, in Napoleonic Europe, and whenever, and just kind of just knowing that that's the bad, not unlike World of Darkness, but instead of vampires and werewolves, it's Atlanteans.
Right. So I think that the big thing we need to keep in mind, since that's the plan, is that we're going to have all different types of media. We're planning short stories, comics, radio plays, all this stuff basically in this world. So whatever rules we make have to be ones that can, no matter what time period an author who's going to write in Lacuna is doing, that they will have the freedom to do that we do give them some rules, but the rules are broad enough that they can take them in new ways in different times,
Right.
So we will always have to be thinking about what's a rule that people could have fun with, or what's a truth that people could have fun with in this world. And that applies because, if you kind of get a rule that will only be true in Atlantis or the Bronze Age, then it's kind of not going to work later on. So, whatever kind of truths or rules we set up, they kind of have to be able to be that adaptable.
Well, that's where your experience as a game designer and my experience as a game designer, we design role-playing games. And that's what we do. We create rules that would allow people to create stuff on their own without us.
Exactly.
And so I think there's a way that we can gamify the setting so that it can be used in any medium by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not thinking that, you know, the world is going to write for Lacuna. I mean, that would be awesome. And I would like to create a structure to make that possible, maybe through copyleft, you know, rights or things like that. But I think the idea is to create a machine that allows for stories rather than to create the whole story.
Right.
Is that what
exactly.
You're saying?
Yeah. We're giving you the toolbox, and we are creating flexible tools and saying, here is the tools you have to work with. And they are very variable and flexible tools so that everybody can kind of put their own stamp on it. So that even though it's kind of all based in the same thing, this idea of Atlantis and them being the old gods and the gods of old, it can still just work. And everything feels so much bigger when you connect it that way, you know? And so it will feel like this living, breathing world if you are connecting it in modern times and the others. But that connection makes sense, you know? So.
Right. And that there's continuity, I think, is a big deal for me. I like the idea of cinematic universes and having continuity. Obviously, you need to make sure that you're not doing that at the cost of good stories. But it's really cool to feel like the story is part of a bigger picture. I think where MCU falls into problems is that you have got to read the entire thing in order, or watch the entire thing in order for this one piece to make sense. I don't want to do that, where you have to read a whole bunch to understand this one thing. But that this one thing is consistent with all these other things.
Right. Exactly. So I guess maybe we should start with, because I think the name Lacuna also says a lot about what we're trying to accomplish as well. So you picked out the name. So what does Lacuna mean? What is it? What's the definition of Lacuna?
It's one rendering of a literary term or historical term. It's actually an anthropological term, where it just basically means missing pages. And it's referring to ancient texts or historical texts that have missing pages or missing content. And the conceit is that we're going to be telling the stories of what's missing and telling the real history of what was going on. And that's where it came from. It was pretty it was kind of an aha moment when that name came to me, because I didn't know what to call this. I wanted to do things like, you know, before the pillars, kind of referencing the pillars of Hercules and things like that. But it wasn't. But what if I want to write a story in France? You know, whatever. So, but that one came to me actually from a game I designed where there was a mechanic in there called Lacuna.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, I'll just use that. I think it makes sense.
I have an anthropology degree, so I'm familiar with the term in that sense. So.
Well, I hope I didn't mess that definition up.
No, that's pretty much it. It's just like the missing bits, you know, it's like the stuff that isn't quite there and you're having to fill it in, you know? So there's the stuff, you know, and the stuff you don't know, you know, and the stuff you don't know is kind of the missing bits of history, you know? What don't we know about that? That's Lacuna, the missing parts, you know. For a while, you know, Amelia Earhart, until they actually found her, but she was like a missing piece. Like, what happened, you know, or the Mary Celeste, or any of these mysteries that happen, they're kind of these missing pieces. Like, we know the start of it, right? We know where the Mary Celeste left. We know where Amelia Earhart left, but then what happened? Especially like when the Mary Celeste was found, what happened in between? That's the mystery. That's the part that you're trying to fill in, and that's what we're going to try to fill in. With kind of these myths and these, you know, and these stories, you know. Yeah,
you bring up myth. That's a good point. One of the things we've already discussed is that we want to lean heavily on mythology. And I don't want to retell mythology in a Game of Thrones way. I've read books where, okay, now we're talking to the god Ares and he has a personality and all that. And that's not really what, I guess that's fine, but that's not really what I have in mind. My thinking is more that what stories we do tell are consistent with mythology, and so you can
they're
see
the
how the
other
mythology
stories.
happened.
Yeah,
right?
they're like the apocrypha. They're
Right.
like the other stuff. Like, oh, I never heard this story about Ares. To use your example, like I've never heard this story before.
One of my first things I want to tackle is the idea of I wanted to tell the story of Zeus, but given the framings of all of this and taking one of the first things that I did was I tried to conflate Zeus with all of the other gods that would match Zeus's description from all the other cultures I could think of. And so I was able to conflate Zeus with Marduk as an example and say, okay, well, there's really this very similar story. So why don't we conflate these two stories and then put that in Atlantis? And what does it look like now? And what would his name be? And then so the story of Zeus is really a character that I'm going to create, but that kind of that brings these mythologies into a realistic telling.
Right. And then the idea is like, well, at some point in history, this story got changed and enough with the different cultures in the world that now they're kind of two different characters, or supposedly two different gods.
Right.
It's like telling of the same, like it's like the telling of the same story, like the anchor story that then gets kind of like spread out and changed over time. Like everyone in the world has a flood story. Like every culture has some kind of flood story. But what was the originator of that? Like, what was the actual story of that flood? We don't know.
Right.
Because every culture has their own version of it. And you can find that, look in culture mythology, and you will find so many cultures and their religion and their beliefs and their mythology have a flood story. But what was that? That's kind of what we're going after. Like,
right. So we're going to have a flood story, and then it'll have been retold in all these cultures. So in the case of Zeus, so this was the Zeus story was among the I'm going to call them refugees of Atlantis landing in Babylonia. And then that story was told under Marduk, but then later spread to Greece. And then, because the Zeus story in Greece happens, I think, a couple thousand years after the Marduk story in Babylonia. And so I'm not an anthropologist, but I would say they might be connected. And if we can make sure they're consistent with one another, they can be conflated. And for the purposes of fiction, the stories write themselves.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, it's really cool. It's like, because when people do kind of retellings of myths or whatever, oftentimes it's kind of the same but different settings, like different paint. You know what I mean? Like it's like you're going to take the story. One of my personal favorites of like Orpheus and Eurydice, and I can never pronounce that name. I feel so bad.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. And that story, and people retell it because it's kind of this classic story of love. He goes down to the underworld to bring her back and all this stuff, but they kind of just throw different trappings on it. What we're talking about is like digging into the story and the what if, and really truly kind of taking it in a different direction. Of what if, what really happened. I think the closest maybe somebody came would be the book Wicked, about the Wicked Witch of the West. That might be the closest thing to the type of thing that I'm thinking of in terms of just taking the story and not just throwing different settings or different superficial stuff on it, but actually taking it and really, going deep into it. And like, where might that story have come from?
I popped up a whiteboard because one of the things I want to start getting into as we're talking about major themes is creating sort of, in the game world, we would call it a design brief. And Danny and I are both very familiar with doing it this way. But the idea is to create sort of a guiding star for the project so that when really cool ideas come up, we can think, okay, is this consistent with our original design vision or not? And if it is, great. If not, then we should probably reevaluate it. The danger in creating a setting like this is that we can go so many different directions. I think I should add that I think we're going to start developing the world in the pre-Bronze Age so that we have a clear understanding of the foundations of the setting where everything came from.
Right.
And even though the stories may not take place then.
Right.
And we're going to have to figure out, if we're using mythology, how to conflate various characters into one person and understand what their actual stories are. We're going to have to figure out what the timelines are. So there's a lot of work that we need to do even before we start thinking about stories. But before we start any of that, I think it's important to do a design brief. Have you done design briefs before in your game work?
I have not done them personally because I've always been a freelance. I've gotten them, so I've seen them, but I've never written one myself. But I have gotten them before when I've worked as a freelancer. So this will be an exciting, well, not necessarily, because I've been doing Ironbound, and we do have a design brief for that, but it was a while ago. So I think I kind of blanked, and we're just so immersed in the world now that I forget that we kind of sat there and did that. So I have done it once.
I think the practice started probably in video games, because when you look at complex design briefs, they're always sort of like, it's going to be a third-person shooter. It's going to take place in this environment. It's going to have this kind of gameplay. And but when it's translated into tabletop role-playing games, it can be much more about tone, vision, what you want the play experience to be like. And if you get too specific, then it can be very constraining. So you want to be able to create a design brief that articulates your vision for this whole project, but that at the same time allows for the freedom to negotiate within that vision. What we're trying to do is avoid the problem of like the show Lost, where you don't know where it's going, what's going on, and even the writers didn't. They just figured it out as they went, right? And
Wow.
we're trying to avoid that.
I still remember the anger over that back in the day. I still remember people being upset. But yeah, no, totally, yeah. So this is and what this really helps with, as for anybody listening who hasn't built worlds or done a design brief before, is specifically it's because when you're doing stuff like video games and role-playing games, not only are you having multiple people work on it, so you have to have a consistency of vision. You have to have as Chris put it, a guiding star, a lighthouse, a way of saying this is where we're going, so that everybody working on it. And when you're working on a big role-playing game or you're working on a video game, you're talking about hundreds of people, who work on it, from the art to the editors to the publishers to everybody, and they all have to be on the same page. So this is like the first part, where Chris and I are going to figure out what page we're on and come up with some agreed upon things for Lacuna that we will then work from for anything else that we do. Right? Does that sound?
Well put. Yeah, well
sounds
put.
about right. Yeah.
No, if there's some things we have established already, and that's the tagline: "Gods are real; these are their stories." So that's going to imply that most of our stories are going to be about gods or people affiliated with those gods or kids of those gods or whatever. I don't think that should necessarily preclude mortals. Like, I still think we can tell the mortal stories, but it's always probably going to be in relationship to what's going on with the gods.
Right. Well, I mean, even in mythology,
it's not going to be Buffy the
yeah.
Vampire Slayer. It's
yeah, because even in mythology, you had demigods or heroes or anything like that who were affected by it. So you could still do stories as long as the premise of that story for the human is gods are real and these are their stories. And so the story would be about somehow how the human or demigod or whatever is affected by that truth that gods are real. How are they affected by it? Are they just finding it out? Is some god trying to manipulate their lives, or somebody they love and they need to deal with it? What's happening that deals with the gods are real, these are their stories? So that one's good, in my opinion, as part of the design brief, because it does say gods are real, these are their stories, but it doesn't preclude us from just talking about gods. As long as the premise is true that gods are real and that this is a story about the premise that gods are real, we're good. We're good. We can check off that box.
If we have somebody with a crisis of faith, the story
Right.
might be about how he's really, shouldn't be having a crisis of, maybe it's crisis of allegiance.
Yeah. There you go.
So I think that does. I mean, this would be, I think, the overall vision. And I like to think in terms of log lines, and we're going to be doing that a lot on this stream because I adhere to the save the cat methodology of screenplay writing, and I like to use that on all of my fiction. So I'm going to naturally think in those terms. But if we were to come up with a log line for our setting, I think that's probably it. I don't think we can get any more precise than that. So I guess we've done some work on this already.
A little bit, yeah. I mean,
the epic nature of it isn't really represented in the way that, this is, we're not, you don't know this is Atlantis. You don't know that we're talking about all of human history. There's a lot that this doesn't capture.
Right. But it's the fulcrum on which everything else spins. And so from here, it's kind of like the top of, it's the pinpoint of the fulcrum of the machine that everything else is going to balance and pivot and move off from. So, yeah.
Yeah. If we were to do the logline formula, it would look like, I'm doing this from memory, so forgive me, but it's something like, subject has, it's subject wants something, something is in the way of that. Boy, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but anyway, we wanted to add more definition to it. We could say gods of antiquity were Atlanteans, and they exist among mortals after the fall. Right. So that puts a little bit more texture. For those of you that are listening and not watching, you don't get to see my horrible spelling as I do this in real time. But yeah, that would probably give more, I guess, framing on what we're dealing with. So it needs to fit this picture.
Right.
But that doesn't, I think that doesn't mean that we can't have Lemuria and we can't have other, it's just that our setting probably is going to include all of that. So we might want to, I don't know if we're going to add that or not, but.
Well, I think basically what I'm thinking is as I put it, like a fulcrum at the top of a pyramid, right? So at the most base, you have gods revealed. These are their stories. Then you get a little bit more detailed. Gods of antiquity were Atlanteans, and they exist among mortals after the fall. You see what I mean? Yeah. And then you can kind of move out from there, I'm
making a pyramid in our little
it's a little blue
here.
Pyramid.
It's a little blue pyramid, and it says gods are real. These are their stories, and then in the pyramid we say gods of antiquity were Atlanteans, and they exist among mortals after the fall.
Right.
So,
and then next of that, to get even in more detail, would be their stories have been changed and moved over time as the world has gotten bigger.
Yeah, their stories have changed over time as their worlds have gotten bigger. And
then since we're getting in more has gotten bigger, and you can even put because we're getting more and more detailed, many of the gods are in antiquity are actually conflations of a singular god. We might need to rephrase that. This is a writer's room, so this is what happens. Yeah. But basically you're going from the most base, gods are real, these are their stories. Gods are antiquity were Atlanteans, and they exist in mortals after the fall. And now we're talking about their stories. Now we're talking about their stories and how, so we're getting in more detail about what that means, you know.
Yeah, I think that works. That's a good framing for a design vision. You know, there's really a lot that can happen from here and around here, and this pretty clearly articulates what the whole setting is about.
Right.
So what this doesn't do is really tell us the tone, the tenor, the voice. I'm not sure, and I'll ask you about this. I'm not sure how much we want to do that. If we were designing a game, I would want to do that. But
Right.
I imagine that, like the Marvel universe,
Right.
you can have Deadpool and you can have Thor and the same universe.
Well, I'm thinking if you want to keep it, you know, so that you can do pretty much any timeline. We're not just doing a singular story in one year or something, that you don't really need to, because like the atmosphere of the stories could be very different. So I don't think you want to get too much into what the atmosphere or tone of it is. I think the only thing we might want to distinguish, because that's pretty important, is that the stories are consistent with how these gods are viewed, or they explain some sort of hypocrisy within two different stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we can do is start making a list of Lacuna is ... and then Lacuna is not.
Right.
And this will help us North Star ourselves a bit. But to your point, one of them is Lacuna is consistent with mythology and history.
Right.
Or explains inconsistencies, right?
Or explains inconsistencies, right.
In this.
Yeah. That's definitely what it is. Yeah.
That is an important stipulation, because that means then, you know, we can have it, you know, might look like some historical event is completely different than what we're saying in our fiction, but as long as our fiction explains why that's the case, then we're good. Lacuna is not one thing I want to. I like the is nots, because I can say it is not a Disney movie. Nothing against Disney movies, but you know, we're trying to go against the grain of Atlantis.
The Lost City. I liked that movie.
It's fine,
you know,
but that's not what this is.
No.
I think I should probably stipulate that, because there can be Disney movies in Lacuna. So it may not be a good way of putting it. I think what I'm trying to say is that we don't want Atlantis to be cartoonish or not realistic. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know how to phrase that. Not a cartoon. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, like, you know, questions like magic, because we've already discussed we're going to want immortality. There's going to be some sort of supernatural stuff happening. Right. We've even discussed, we're going to get to this later, but we even discussed how mortals can become immortal and what that entails. We're probably going to be dealing with monsters and stuff of mythology. So I think we need to stipulate that while this is true, it's going to be done in a way that is, I guess, more realistic.
Right. I'm wondering if we could say, it says not a cartoon. We could say is not geared towards children, perhaps.
Yeah, it's
and like I said, I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall here. Is not.
Well, because what we're trying to articulate is that this is a more realistic approach to the content. So
right.
Not I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
Nick, who's in chat? Help us out here.
We have Nick.
What are we trying to say?
I think leave that there for now, and we can come back to it, because we kind of know what it means.
I put it in quotes.
Yeah, put it in quotes.
It's not a quote unquote cartoon.
I also think that in either Lacuna is, or I think it would be Lacuna is also respectful of different cultures and also their systems and stuff, because if you're going to tell different stories and stuff, you don't want to do it in a way, you know what I mean, like that's going to be like, oh well, they're just whatever and they don't know anything. It's going to be respectful of however different cultures tell these stories that you're about to tell.
So I put Lacuna is respectful of different cultures, as you said, and then I put in Lacuna is not for appropriation.
Right.
And there's a point here that is important to make. I, for example, am very interested in Native American mythology, but I would not feel comfortable writing those stories. I would want somebody like Adam, who I know from the Appajax community, to write those stories, who is a member of the tribes. So we had to be careful about that as we're building the setting to make room for it, but not to appropriate it. The stories I'm looking at in particular are mostly Egyptian, Babylonia, and Greek. And so there's definitely waters there that needed to be tread carefully. So that's kind of a meta one, which is we also do in these design documents. We're talking about both content and how the content should be used.
Right. I mean, this just gives us a way where if we're looking at something and we're questioning whether or not, it's part of our, this is what Lacuna is. It's part of our design that these things have to be respectful and done in a respectful way. No matter what you're doing, and no matter who the god is, like it's got to be, it's not like we're saying they all have to be good people or whatever. It just has to be done in a way that shows that they are people, and be respectful of that,
Yeah. I want to add that Lacuna is a place of magic and monsters, but I want to qualify that in a way to say that it's not, that if magic and monsters were real, this is what they would be. You know what I mean? Not exactly sure how to frame this, but the idea that we'll definitely have things like hydras, but it's going to be it's not going to be Clash of the Titans hydra. It's going to be something that's probably an actual a Neolithic monster that's in the ocean.
Right.
So if there's a way to phrase
somebody would have been like, that's a hydra, and that's
right.
how the story got told, right? Like, yeah.
But I'll put for now, but a realistic take, and then we know what that means, and we can probably refine the language.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, hey, you're in a writer's room, y'all. The folks that are watching this, so this is kind of what happens. You kind of throw it out there and see how it feels, and then kind of come back to it and refine it as you guys start talking.
And I should add that this document we're making, this design document, these are supposed to be living documents. They're not something that it's in stone. We're only going to do it this way. It's really a way to test our ideas against something. So think of it more like a baseline, and then it grows over time and it changes over time. One thing that we have to be cautious of is if we're changing this document, we need to be very deliberate about it. Because, Dannie, our original intent was this. The thing we're doing here goes against that intent. Do we want to change it here, or do we want to change the thing we're doing? Do we want to change the baseline, or do we want to change the thing we're doing? And we have to actually have those conversations. If this baseline didn't exist, then we could potentially be all over the place.
Right. And for those who are listening and not watching right now, we have a blue pyramid with gods are real. These are their stories on top. And then in the pyramid, we have 3 levels. Gods of antiquity were Atlanteans, and they exist among mortals after the fall. Next, their stories have changed over time as their worlds have gotten bigger. And 3, many of the gods of antiquity are actually conflations of a singular god. These are kind of more, as you get down to it, more specific things about the gods and the characters that we're going to be writing about. We also have 2 yellow sticky notes with Lacuna is and Lacuna is not. And right now we have consistent with mythology and history, or explains inconsistencies, respectful of different cultures, and a place of magic and monsters, but a realistic take, for one. Under Lacuna is, and under Lacuna is not, we have is not a cartoon in quotations and for appropriation. Where we're going to probably come back to a place of magic and monsters, but a realistic take, and is not a cartoon. As we refine kind of what we mean and how to get that across. Because part of it is Chris and I may know what we mean, but what we got to do is communicate that to somebody who can't talk to us, right? So we're kind of on the same wavelength. We get what each other means, but we got to communicate to people who are not here. We got to be able to give them this, and they'll be able to understand what we mean when we say that. So while this may just be good if it's just Chris and I, but since we intend to have more writers and more people and more artists contributing to this world, we need to make sure that it's at least understandable for a majority of people, what we're after, and vagueness really doesn't do well for that, I speak from experience. I speak from experience.
Yeah, well put. And you've had to work with design documents like this before, and you've had to tackle, inside communications or inside jokes, but with no context, no idea what they mean by that. So precise language is important. We're not going to spend all of our time figuring that language out now, but we will. This is a good question. I'm going to bring this up front. Nick has asked, is there a medium you don't think Lacuna would be well suited for?
I don't know. I mean, I think we're kind of going for comics, stories, novels, paintings.
My initial idea is thinking as games and novels, short fiction.
Yeah.
Would it, even radio dramas, that kind of thing? Is there a medium I don't think it would be suited for? No. We're going to do all mediums now. Nick, it's going to be everybody. All stories. Every last one.
Yeah.
I think that we have to be careful with academic audiences because we're going to be, dumping on all of it. It's not going to be accurate to mythology. It's not going to be accurate to history. It's not going to be accurate to religions. We're going to be dealing with religion too, because remember, gods of antiquity, we're dealing with some religions that are still alive today. So I don't think that you're going to get a lot of knowledge out of this. So I wouldn't do anything meant for education.
Right.
How's that? That fair?
Yeah. We're not going to claim we're teaching people about Atlantis.
No.
You can even put that under, Lacuna is not. You can even put it under there. It's not, for academics or educational purposes. It is fictional, I'm
going to add Lacuna feels like as a category.
Oh, there we go. Yes. That's helpful. That would be really helpful to me. Like whenever I look at this stuff, I always think if I'm somebody who knows nothing and I'm coming in, what would I be helpful for me? And I think something like that Lacuna feels like would be very helpful for me.
We talked about Game of Thrones already. We can put that on there. Or Song of Ice and Fire for those that know. That was in my head. What's in your head?
My head would maybe go to that's good. Game of Thrones. Maybe go to
Do you think there's some American gods here?
Yeah, I think American gods, something like Troy.
Like what?
Troy. Did you ever see the movie Troy?
With Troi.
Troi. Yeah, it was about the Trojan War.
Oh, Troy. I heard a K at the end of that. And I was like, I don't know what that is.
Because it wasn't like history, but they tried to keep it like based off of. Oh, here's a good one. There was that movie and it had Ian Graffood in it and he played Lancelot. And it was about the theory if Lancelot and Arthur were actually Roman soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was super gritty. It was like a gritty, like Merlin was actually like a druidic shaman or something.
I kind of remember that. I don't know what it's called.
That would be.
We have another comment. So the example Nick brought up was genre, in terms of genre and media, high fantasy versus swords and sorcery. I think that at least in the beginning, as we're dealing with the Bronze Age, pre-Bronze Age, this is more swords and sandals kind of. Like high fantasy wouldn't work, I don't think, in this setting.
Yeah,
I think it could in the right angle, but we're not going to have Lord of the Rings style, monumental battles against good and evil. Good point.
Right. Yeah. The movie was King Arthur, 2004. I was also thinking like the 13th Warrior.
The other thing is kind of out of the blue, but I've been watching this show, Interview with the Vampire, which incredible. I don't know if everybody shares that opinion. I don't care.
A lot of people like it,
really
from what I've heard.
But I see more Interview with the Vampire in later years. There's one novel that I wrote, never went anywhere, that takes place in the post-Prohibition New Orleans, that I would say is actually consistent with Lacuna.
How do you feel about Highlander?
I love Highlander, but in terms of it, does it feel like that?
Terms of Lacuna, yeah.
I think it's walking the line, but would probably fit.
Yeah.
I have to be honest. I haven't seen any of the others.
Supernatural, yeah.
I've only seen the first one.
Yeah, the TV show, was definitely a lot more of like, more realistic than the movie. But yeah, Interview with the Vampire, Highlander, perhaps. I
think it's good, and we can't feel like everything.
Oh no, but yeah, just in general, so people kind of get the idea of like what's happening.
I'm adding high fantasy under Lacuna is not.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for making us. This is why I'm glad there's actually people, because they can kind of come in and be like, "What about this?" And we'll be like, "Yeah, we should probably use that." Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah, no, that's good. I think we have a really good start here. That's going to be defined. More defined later on, but that's definitely a good place to start, because like you said, you don't want to get into everything. The more you put on there, the more
yeah,
as long as you have something to start from.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a signaling where we're starting. I think long term we're going to get into other historical time periods, but certainly in the beginning we're going to have to focus a lot on pre-Bronze Age and Bronze Age.
Just to get a base.
To have a base on what the stories are going to be about later, so you already know what's happened in history. If you're writing, let's say, that New Orleans story I was telling you about, and the main character is one of these gods, you'll know where that person came from, even if the story isn't about the Bronze Age, right?
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of Doctor Who at one point, and there was a particular line where River Song says, "I hate stories about good wizards in history. They always turn out to be him." And it kind of has that feel, right? Like whenever you hear a story, that's kind of what our characters are going to be doing. They'll hear a story and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that's so and so." It's going to be that vibe of like, where River Song's going, "Oh, I hate stories about good wizards. They always turn out to be him."
Right. So we've already said this. Actually, I think we just said it about starting in the Bronze Age. Why are we starting? We're actually starting Proto Bronze Age, and why? I want to talk about what triggered this whole thing. It was about I was trying to do the math. It must have been about 20 years ago. I stumbled upon this website that changed my thinking about Atlantis altogether. And I want to be clear that I don't necessarily believe, like, I'm agnostic about Atlantis. I don't know whether it existed or not. Actually, if the academic in me believes that Atlantis was a retelling of the Minoan civilization's fall, earthquakes and all. And I think that was the Minoan civilization was very, very advanced for the time, and to the Bronze Age Mycenaeans, they would have looked like gods probably. And when you look at the stories of the Minotaur and all of that, King Midas, those are all Minoans. So that's what I think it was. But the creative in me likes to fantasize about the Atlantis. And I read Plato, and I read a lot of the Edgar Casey, who I think the audience may not be as familiar with him. He was known as the sleeping psychic, and he was around, I can't remember the time period. I'm gonna have to look that up. But I want to say like the 20s and 30s. I could be wrong. I probably shouldn't spout that without fact checking it. But anyway, he was around in the modern era. And he was known for falling into these trances, and this guy was for real, by the way. I mean, this wasn't just some act. He would fall into these trances, and then he would spout prophecies. And then over his long life, the people around him would record all of his prophecies. And he prophesied all kinds of stuff. He was a Nostradamus type of prophecy guy. But one of the things he talked a lot about in his sleeping state was Atlantis. And he had, in his sleeping state, kind of created this entire history and world with full characters and everything, all about Atlantis. And so it's fascinating to read Edgar Casey. Whether or not you believe him there's a whole society around him now.
Right.
Whether or not you believe him, to me, is beside the point. There's
like a society. There's groups. There's clubs.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of stuff. Yeah. By the way, he was born in 1877 and died in 1945.
Okay, so I was right. 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
I'll take it. That's a win. Anyway, so you can actually buy books of his prophecies, and but he did a lot on Atlantis, and kind of started this whole revival, I would say, on Atlantis in the New Age movement. It was before Casey. Atlantis was just a story Plato told, and it wasn't really that big a deal. But after Casey, it became this huge phenomenon, and that's when we get this sort of crystal power, immortal gods on an island kind of picture that came from Casey. And there were other thought leaders around that time that also produced books. There's this one book called The Children of the Order of the Law of One. I'll say it slower. The Children of the Order of the Law of One. And the name eludes me on who wrote it, but he was a Casey guy. And this book is phenomenal. I look at it as a work of fiction. No, you have to be honest. But if you're just reading a book, it's just fascinating. It's a really fascinating book. But it talks all about the cultures and societies of Atlantis. But it's with this, I would characterize as a New Age point of view. And that's the Atlantis we have in our heads today because of these people. But I say all of this because I stumbled upon this site which introduced me to all of that. I'm actually going to pull it up. I can find it. And I'm going to put it in the show notes so those of you at home can go and check it out. There's this, I don't even know how to characterize this person, but he has done all kinds of research on Atlantis for quite a long time. And he put out this site called Was This Atlantis? His name is Walter Smith. And we did a little bit of looking into him before the stream. I've never actually looked much into him. He has a book out that came out in 2011 that talks about all this. But I stumbled upon this site, which is called Was This Atlantis? And it just is a research dump, everything that he's learned about Atlantis, and then the conclusions he drew. He includes Edgar Casey in his research. So, obviously there's some speculation, how serious is this guy's research? I never looked at it as an academic thing, so that stuff doesn't really bother me or interest me. I'm more interested in the stories that can be told within this framework, and this is what started the whole idea, was this Atlantis. And my favorite thing is the continent. I'm going to try to pull up, see if I can see the page where it shows the continent. So if you're listening to this, you got to look this up. There is a map rendering of the Atlantean continent in the middle of the Atlantic, and it's basically the mid-Atlantic ridge if it was elevated. And this guy's theory is that a meteor hit around late 9000 BC, somewhere near the Gulf of Mexico, and sunk the ocean floor. Mm-hmm. And so this continent, all that's left are the Azores. And this picture of Atlantis, it seared into my consciousness. And this is the story I wanted to tell. And in fact, I wrote novels that took place here, but I found even after writing 3 novels that I couldn't even tap the potential storytelling of this picture. So that's when I decided, after years of looking at this, that I'd like to make it an open setting with all kinds of media that can tackle it from any number of directions. Mm-hmm. What is this Atlantis? It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, hopefully we can leave the link and stuff in the show notes so people can look it up. Write down the name of the books and stuff that we mentioned, so people can do that.
So this is if we use this as our point, now we have to construct a timeline and what actually happened, and that's, I think, going to be the subject of our stream next week as we really start assembling the timeline. But we can start doing sweeping statements, because this has to happen pre-Bronze Age. So we can deduce that roughly about the times of the rise of the Assyrians, etc., there was already a society fully bloomed in the middle of the Atlantic, and possibly in the Pacific. We haven't even gotten to Lemuria yet, which is adjacent to this. And the continent, when you look at it, I'm going to describe it a bit. It's this long, slender continent that starts probably just north of Nova Scotia, latitude-wise, and goes all the way down to probably Florida. And for those across the pond, we're looking at, UK all the way down to Morocco, and maybe further. I don't have the whole world map on here, but I think I might have one somewhere. I'll pull it up. In the north, then, you're dealing with, alpine geography with near Arctic probably conditions, and then the mountain range slenders out before it becomes lowlands, and in the south it's probably subtropical.
Right. So
this is the landscape we're dealing with, and then the distance between Europe from the east coast of this continent is kind of negligible. Pretty easy to get into a boat and go there. I would imagine the waters would be something like the English Channel in terms of treachery, so it probably wouldn't be that easy, but it'd be way easier than when the Vikings did it. And then on the south end, the connection to the Caribbean is going to be extremely close. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said about transcontinental activity pre-Bronze Age between what will become the Americas and then what will become Africa and Europe.
Right.
So it's a really great starting place. I mean, that's why I want to do this. It's so exciting to me that would be the stage.
Yeah. No, agree. You want the one that's going to be the most interesting, that you can get the most out of. So I agree there. So that's why. Why? The why we're kind of doing it pre-Bronze Age is because of the way the continent is set up and its closeness and the ability to kind of talk about a bunch of different things at the same time in that time period. So whether it be the climate or the different people or them encountering other peoples or spreading out from Atlantis, that would be happening, all that. So, yeah.
And then broad strokes, when we look at the history of things, the main consensus was that there was some sort of cataclysm that sunk Atlantis. Edgar Cayce said it was a meteor and it hit about almost 10,000 BC. I call BS on that. I think that that's way, 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 way too old. I think that if something like that happened, it would have been much, much later. Cayce also says there are two cataclysms. There's the one that broke up the continent and destroyed the hubris of the Atlanteans, and then there was the one that sunk the continent and caused the diaspora, where every Atlantean had to leave. I like that idea. I like the idea a lot. And so I was kind of heading that direction. But when we're constructing our timelines, you and I are going to have to figure out what those cataclysms were, when they were, and what the rest of the world was doing at that time.
Right. Because then, if somebody wants to, well, what happened here, we can be like, here, and they will have the background for it. Like if they want to do something like, oh, I want my character to meet up with another god who they haven't seen since the cataclysm. Oh, we'll be like, oh, okay, but they need to know what happened. And we can be like, okay, here's the cataclysm you're talking about. And then they can have their characters meet up and, make reference to it and stuff like that. And then that way, anybody else also writing about it has the same information, and that's not like they can't adapt it and be like, well, maybe people have two different versions of their stories. Maybe so, but here's the truth. So you need to know that you're just kind of going through, well, in the midst of time, I lost this memory of what happened because I'm thousands of years old. Or what I actually did during the cataclysm didn't make me look very good. So
probably more to the point.
So I don't want to tell people that. So this is what I'm going to tell people happened instead. And, whereas the reader will be able to know, well, that's not actually the case if they read other stories. And then that just gives another depth to it, right? Because if they read in another story about another character who ran into that first character and saw what they actually did, then they read another story where this character is saying, oh, I did this, that, and the other. The reader then feels like this is a world, right? Where people are telling different stories and trying to make them look good, and it follows through on a bunch of things. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think we have to make a lot up. I would be more, obviously in the stories we create, we do, but in terms of the setting and the events that happened, I don't think we have to make a lot up. I think all we have to do is look to mythology, conflate it with history and our version of it. And then, Clash of the Titans is a perfect example. The Titan War is an actual term for it. You probably know the term for the Titan War. But in short, the elder gods had god children, and those god children overthrow the elder gods and then establish Olympus. And that same story is told in Babylon, and that same story is told in other mythologies. And so we're really talking about the same event, even though the characters are different based on the myth you're going after. So that
along came Zeus, he hurled his lightning bolts. Oh, sorry.
Danny's a performer, by the way. So
not a singer, though. So
well,
Hercules is one of my favorite Disney, so I have to reference it when at all possible, even though it is not historically accurate, because that's probably the worst thing
or
Disney
mythologically
ever did,
accurate,
right? Is make like Zeus and Hera or like a good family. That was probably the worst lie they ever did, but I still like it. So
I think Russell Crowe's Zeus is way more realistic.
Truth, right? Truth. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, look, people are making fun, but that's Zeus. That's the stories. That's the stories. If you don't know what he's referring to Love and Thunder, the Thor movie. That's Zeus, though. Like you look at it and you're like, yep, that's about right.
He was a better Zeus than he was a Javert, and I'll leave it there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the so yeah, the overthrow of the Titans. That's one moment in history,
Right.
in our history, that can be universal across all mythologies that everybody's referencing. We just have to establish the truth of that and where it happens in the timeline, and where it happens in the timeline, and where it happens geographically. And so I don't think we have to make up a lot. In fact, I'd rather, if we could, take our cues from mythology and say, well, what is the real quote unquote version of this mythological story?
Right.
Because one of my favorites is Tiamat, the goddess, not the dragon.
Yeah.
Well,
look, that's where freaking Guy Gatz was taking all his crap from anyway. So
right.
Let's just admit that right now.
And it's just throwing his own thing out there, I guess, without doing the right world building work that we're doing. But you take the story of Tiamat, and and spoilers, she gets split in two.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that seems to me like, actually, that at the end, that she's split in two, doesn't that sound like a nation called Tiamat got divided into two? Doesn't that make more sense? And so that's kind of where my head goes when I'm looking at mythology, is like, what is the real story here? And did Adam of the Bible live 900 years? Or was it the name Adam that was passed on for 9 generations?
Right.
And so these are the kinds of, I think we can do that kind of thing with our history.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, when we're kind of coming up with this, maybe have like 2-3 broad stroke items that are the truth, and then then kind of like whatever else is there, work with it. The cataclysm was this kind of thing. It happened here and it happened this time. Right. And then that's kind of it. And I think that works, because that gives people like to work from and stuff. If we say, oh, it was a flood that happened this time and, started here, and then just kind of let people, work from that. And then as people write about stuff,
we don't want to dictate everything that happens, because then where's the storytelling?
Right.
You're right.
Right.
That's a really good point.
Just kind of like highlight notes of, here it is. And then we'll be adding to it, because as people go in the world, we also want it to be consistent. So if we have somebody write a flood story or a flood comic or an audio play that has to do with like the cataclysm that say was a flood, not saying it would be, but let's just say, then anybody else who wants to write about that now has to kind of make sure that, according to our brief, that it fits with everything else, or it explains inconsistencies with that story. So not only are we trying to be consistent with history and mythology and what's actually in anthropology and what's actually there, also within the context of the stories that we're telling ourselves and the media that we're doing ourselves. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is where the game design comes in. I think that while my inkling might be to go and say, this is everything that happened over 6,000 years. These are all of the people involved, and here is an encyclopedia about everything. If I were to do that, that kind of removes the purpose of this whole project. The game design comes into, how do you give people enough platform in order to create their own content and have the guardrails there, but that doesn't define what their content has to be.
Yeah, we always call it breadcrumbs when I've been working as a freelancer. You want the breadcrumbs. You want the little stuff that's left over, and people say Zeus disappeared for 2 years after that. Some say he was doing this. Some say he was doing that. Some say he was doing this third thing. You decide what the truth is, and then somebody comes along and plays with it. Oh, what was Zeus doing between those 2 years?
Yeah.
Probably, let's be honest, but
Yeah, and if you want to produce your film noir, you just need to know the broad strokes anyway, right? And you can just, as long as you're consistent with that and the design vision, you're good. I love it.
Yeah.
So we're going to start our own projects within the setting. I'm going to write something, and Danny's going to write something, and we're going to use this stream to not only world build everything we need in order to write those specific things. Again, we're not going to build everything, just enough for our projects.
Right.
And then we're going to also writers room story build each other's projects, and then we're going to write them, and that'll be the first go with this. But that's the process that I want to develop on the stream so that anybody can participate. And the idea is that we'll have creators contributing to this, or just people tuning in to see how we're doing it. Maybe that could apply some
follow along, read the results. Oh, Chris was writing this story he talked about on stream. I wonder what happened with that. Oh, here's that story that we were talking about. He's finished with it. Here it is. I'm like, oh wow, now I see how it went from us talking about it and not to this final polished product. And I think that's really neat, for sure. So some of the things we'll have to do is some of that, how the one of the bigger ones we talked about, at least for me, was going to be the gods and their children. Like, how did the elder gods and the children, how does that work? And the immortality, and what are kind of the things about that, was going to be the next kind of thing that we're going to have to talk about.
I think so. And along with that, the timeline, and where they stand on that. The other thing is, and I hate to be all Tolkien about this, but Tolkien.
Oh no, I love. I have a tattoo.
We do need to understand.
You're talking about the man now. You're talking about the man of world building now. His name has been invoked. So now we're in trouble. Well,
with him in mind, I mean, what we do need a language, and the reason is because I figured this out pretty early on when thinking through this project, is what do we call things? I don't want to just come up with some willy-nilly fantasy name for something, and I definitely don't want to use English words. And it doesn't make sense to use the words from antiquity either if we're talking about Atlantis. So Atlantis was the Greek word. Actually, wasn't even. I think that's the bastardized English version of the Greek
version.
Word.
Yeah.
So we can't call it Atlantis. What do we call it, right? And what do we call the cities that are there? And what are the people's names? What is Zeus's name if he was an Atlantean? Since Zeus is a Greek name.
The Greek name, yeah. The Greeks came up with it.
So we need to come up with a language specifically so we can come up with proper nouns.
Right. And what's cool about that, what I'm really excited about, and what I like as like a Tolkien fan and people like that sort of thing, this will so much make the world feel more real too. And people who get invested in the world will get benefits from that, because if they understand how we're doing proper nouns and the language, they'll be able to make connections even before we connect them in the story, right? They'll be able to say, oh, if they do proper nouns like this name's got to mean something like this. And then 4 pages later, they see it and they're like, aha, I knew it. Right?
And then they can use our language at weddings.
Yes,
and,
of course.
We could give courses on the language. And I do think it's important because for the authenticity part. And I've already dip my toes into this process, but I want to stop what I'm doing there and bring it open into the Lacuna project, and then we can all work on it. But that's something before we can even write stories, we have to understand the timeline, we have to understand the characters, we have to understand the place, and we have to understand the language. So we have a lot of work to do before we even get to story building.
Yeah, before we even get to the point where, hey, we're going to write our first media and in this world. So yeah.
This is very different than how I normally work. Normally, I just jump in and write it, and so it's kind of exciting. I'm really trying to be thoughtful about it and deliberate, knowing that other people are going to be involved, and that we have this really strong vision of realism and authenticity. So we have to be careful. We can't just spit stuff out. And I've already done that. I've written 3 books in this setting already that none of them are going to work, and because I didn't do the work needed before I wrote the stories.
You didn't have me.
I didn't have you. What were they thinking?
So I'm excited. I think this is going to be cool. I love this sort of stuff as someone with an anthropology degree. And I don't know somebody doing this, just saying, let's build a world that other people can just play in. I mean, usually they have something. And for us, we're just saying, here's this world, we're going to build it. And then other people can play in it however they want to play. If you're a comic book artist, if you're a painter, if you're an actor, if you're whatever. You know what I mean? What if somebody wants to do a podcast of like Marduk diary entries? You know,
I would subscribe.
You know, like you could do anything. And as long as it follows within our design brief and criteria, we'll put it up on the website and show it, you know, and consider it a part of the world, you know.
We're just getting started, but I do want to create formal processes for doing just that, you know, and we're going to look at what we can do in terms of copyleft, probably Creative Commons style copywriting. And, you know, should somebody create the next Batman under the Lacuna banner, we want to make sure that that person gets compensated if Batman becomes a major blockbuster movie, you know. And we're thinking very critically about this because, and I was telling a friend about this earlier, and we haven't really built the apparatus for it yet. But what I was thinking was I would love a forum for creators to feel like they can have ownership in what they're creating, even if it's a bigger thing than them, even if it's, you know, the Marvel universe. Because we're trying to make our own Marvel universe when it comes down to it. And so the idea of anybody being able to contribute to that and also get bennies for it, that's the vision. That's the goal. I don't know how we're going to do it or build it yet. We're just in the beginning of this, but that's the vision for sure.
Yeah. A place that people can play in and have some guidance and you know, share with other people. And you know, I really think that, you know, we're basically creating a sandbox for other people to work in, and that's always fun. I've always liked working with IPs that I've worked with before. I've done Conan, I've done Dishonored, I've done you know, a whole bunch of different things that were already there, you know, 7C, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's always fun to kind of see and then add your twist on it, you know, and then be like, I'm coming into this, here's what's established, but then make it me and have somebody look at it and say, hey, you know, this was cool. This felt right for the setting and stuff like that. I wrote a piece of the Secret Society book for 7C. And there were some reviews on YouTube and people called out the part that I had written. And that just feels good. You know, it feels good to be like, I'm a part of this world. And they're just like, this feels like 7C. This is something I want to play with, you know, and that's kind of what we're hoping to give to other people and ourselves. We're kind of selfish in that. I did do Torg as well, which Nick will not let me forget ever. I did. So, you know, that's what we're kind of hoping to create for ourselves and other people, you know, like I said, a little selfishly, you know, we want a world to play in too, you know? So, you know, but for other people to come in and play with us, you know, I mean, maybe one day we'll have, you know, 5-6 people on these writers streams and, you know, these writers rooms, and, you know, we'll have 6 of us, you know, spitballing, helping somebody with something they're working on, you know, and we'll have commenters, you know, saying stuff as well, you know, so not only bringing the writers and artists into it, but allowing people who are just watching or want to read it or see it also give input and encouragement and stuff, which is in low supply when you're a creative. Sometimes it can be a lonely business, just sitting in your room and tapping away. So yeah,
well said. I don't think I have anything to add to that. We had expected the stream to go for 2 hours, but I think we're kind of wrapped up because the next conversation probably needs to be about timeline, and that's going to be a whole thing. Yeah, it's going to be a whole thing. So if we can on the next episode get through the timeline and understand what happened in the history of Lacuna, and then maybe we can start talking about the people, the major players involved.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to have to also get into the language and some other things. So I think we're probably at a good point to wrap this up. What do you think?
Yeah. I think we set out, we started. That's my mom.
Oh.
In the comments, that's my mother.
And she says, I quote, that she is very impressed. And there's a heart emoticon.
Yes.
Very nice.
There's my mom commenting.
Thank you for tuning in. That's really great.
Hi, Mother. Hello. So yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, we kind of did the what is it, what are our goals with it and everything. And next time we'll kind of get into timeline and what happened and kind of, do some truths about those that we're going to keep consistent and some of the characters. Yeah.
We're gonna aim to keep this going at the same time slot every Sunday. Obviously things might change, but we'll start there and we'll just keep chugging on. I do have a formal outro here, so I may as well read it. This has been Chris and Danny in the Lacuna Writers Room. Thank you for joining us. We are streaming every Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific. I just said that. 6 p.m. Eastern. And we will continue to build Lacuna's setting and the stories that take place there. Tune in on YouTube or Twitch at Lacuna World and visit us at the website, which is lacunaworld.com. I'm going to be putting all kinds of stuff right there. It's kind of minimal, but there's going to be all kinds of stuff as we start building. I'm going to put out the podcast stream and we're going to have links there. And then any of the storyboarding or the work we do on the whiteboard will go there so you can see our progress. And I'm going to put up blogs. It's going to be a whole thing. So lacunaworld.com. And then you can also sign up there. There's an email alert that you can get alerted when we have new stuff coming out. Right now, we don't have anything else. We'll probably put together a Patreon at some point, right? We're not looking to monetize right away. This is just getting started. But please sign up and tell your friends.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay. See you all next week.
Yeah, come back next week. Bye.